Hi everyone, good morning. I can see you all coming in. Just give you a moment until everybody's in the room. It can sometimes take a moment or two. Right, good morning everyone, and welcome to today's session. This is the fifth in our series, Transition Planning in Extraordinary Times. And the thinking behind this series was to make sure that parents and carers, that you as parents and carers have the essential information that you need and the overview to be able to start preparing yourselves and also your young people for the transition to adult services. And particularly at this time with coronavirus, we know that there are lots of families who maybe won't have had the information and the support that they might normally have hoped to have around transition planning. So the idea of this series is that hopefully that will give you some pointers and give you ideas that you can use in making your own plan for your young person over the next 12 months, 18 months as they're moving forward into that situation. You can listen to any of the previous sessions by going to our website. It's there on the screen, www.scottishtransitions.org.uk. You'll be able to listen to the sessions there, and you'll also be able to download the handouts. So before I go any further, I should introduce myself for anyone who's not attended one of these sessions before. I'm Tracy Francis, and I work for the Scottish Transitions Forum, which is part of ARC Scotland. And what we do, we work with professionals, we work with parents, and we also work with young people to try and improve the experience of transitions to adulthood for as many young people as we possibly can with additional support needs across Scotland. And in the series so far, we've looked at post-school learning options and support. We've looked at safeguarding through guardianship and power of attorney. We've looked at independent living skills. And last week, we had a session with the Transition Fund to look at how some of the funding that might be available and activities that young people can be involved with and how to develop new skills and gain new experiences. So this week, our topic is things to do with work and employment and employability. What's available, what support you can expect, and how that might work going forward. And I'm really pleased to say that we're joined by Jamie Rutherford, who's the Director of Employment with Enable Scotland, and he's going to talk us through some of the options that are available and what Enable can do to support, and also a little bit about the general picture around work and work experience. So Jamie, can I just hand over to you, and can you just say a few words about you and your role?
Yeah, morning everyone. My name is Jamie Rutherford. Like Tracy said, I'm the Director of Employment for Enable Scotland. So Enable Scotland, many of you will know, are Scotland's leading organisation campaigning and delivering services for people who have learning disabilities. And my job at Enable is to run our national employment and skills services. So we deliver services in schools, in college, in university, lots of local authority and Scottish Government employment services supporting disabled people. And we support about 2,000 people across Scotland every year. And I've been doing the job for coming up to 12 years, I think. So quite well versed in the different ways which employment can affect people with learning disabilities. So it's lovely to be speaking to you all. So thank you for your time.
Thanks, Jamie. So as always, before we get started properly, there's a couple of things just to make you aware of. And the first thing is that you can ask questions at any time during the session. There are a couple of questions that have been sent in advance, so we'll be looking at those. But also, if you look on your screen, look for the wee icon. It might be a question mark or it might be the word questions. And if you click on that, it should take you to a dialog box where you can type in your question and you can send that through. And you can do that at any point during the session. And I'll monitor those, and Jamie and I will look at those a little bit later on during the course of the session. The second thing is you should also have an icon on your screen about handouts, and so if you click on that, you'll be able to download the slides from today. You'll also have a sheet that Jamie's put together with some useful information and links that you can follow up for a little bit more about some of the things we'll be talking about. And you've also got a handout there. It's the Scottish Transitions Forum Transitions Planning Guide that's geared towards parents and carers. And that's got links for information on all the topics we've covered in this series and a few more. So if you haven't already looked at that, that's a good one to have a look at too. And then last but not least, it's just to remind you that this session's being recorded. So if you have any problems with the sound or anything of that kind, you'll be able to hear it afterwards. We'll send a link out to everyone who's signed up, and then you'll be able to, so you won't miss anything, basically. You'll be able to catch up on what's said in the discussion. So Jamie, I'm going to hand over to you. Just 1 second. I need to let you share your screen, and then we're in your hands for the next kind of 20-25 minutes. Okay?
Okay.
Just right. Bear with us. Have you got that?
Yep.
Okay.
So can you see my? Can you see the presentation? You can. Right. Excellent. I can't actually see it, so it's. I'm just going to have to kind of fiddle about here whilst I do that. There we are. Bear with me. Right. There we are. There we are. I can see it now. Okay. So morning, everyone. I'm going to talk this morning about transition to employment for disabled young people, and look specifically at an overview for parents and carers. So as I've said before, my name is Jamie. I'm the director here at Enable Scotland, responsible for Enable Works. We support about 2,000 people who have disabilities every year across Scotland, specifically focusing on helping people develop skills to move into, gain and retain employment. I'm also the chair of a charity called the Scottish Union of Supported Employment. That is a membership charity for providers of a specific methodology of supporting people with complex needs into work. And then this morning, in terms of what we're going to discuss, I'm going to talk you through the different types of employment support, because there are lots of different types. How to navigate that is sometimes quite difficult to understand which stakeholders interact and how you can interact with them. And then I think most importantly, what you can expect from providers as parents, and what you can expect for your child, for your young person. I think that's important. So I'm going to show you a bit more about what we do before we start. So I'm going to show you a little video of one of the programs we've run at Enable Works here for a couple of years. We're very proud of, working in partnership with the University of Strathclyde Business School and Scottish Power. I should be able to, that should take you to a video. I should say this link is in, Tracy's going to share the slides as well, so you should be able to see this.
Watching our children grow up, we just want the best for them. We want them to make friends, to be happy, to find what interests them, build on their talents, go to college or uni. We look forward to celebrating their graduation with them. Sound familiar? Not if you have learning disabilities, it's not. Only 4% of school leavers who have a learning disability go into higher education every year in Scotland. That's 56 young people. Only 7% of people in Scotland who have a learning disability have a job. Almost 100% of people want one.
Well, life before working barriers, it wasn't too good. Like, I was firing out of control. I didn't know what I was going to do with my life.
I was not all confident. I was a pretty quiet, shy person. I was very bored. Wasn't doing a lot with my time.
Life before this was kind of awful because I was like applying for jobs and never getting back to me.
Things happened all around me without me having any control. So I shut myself in, I was quiet, and I didn't get involved with anything.
Breaking Barriers changes all that.
Breaking Barriers really is a truly innovative programme. It allows young adults with learning disabilities to attend one of the UK's leading business schools, achieve an accredited qualification, and then work with one of our industry partners, either Scottish Power or Marriott Hotels, to apply what they've learned as part of the university experience. It really is truly breaking barriers.
Breaking Barriers is more than an education and employment programme. It is building confidence and friendships, giving young people access to that life-shaping experience of university that is a rite of passage for so many of us, yet available to so few people who have learning disabilities.
They are extremely clever young people and they've got such a lot to offer.
So proud to ask you a great decision I've ever made in my entire life.
I'm going to be honest, I never thought this would happen to me, but here I am.
Like before this, I was a nervous wreck. But look at me now.
Breaking barriers builds self-respect and opportunity.
Where breaking barriers has led me today is I'm now in a full-time job. I'm doing things that I love doing.
Breaking barriers also changes cultures. Our corporate partners tell us that they learn as much from our learners about how to make their workplace inclusive.
The staff have been too understanding, welcoming. Are you going to want to come to a workplace that we have not affected and what to listen to? Respect is just a massive thing.
So many more young people need our support. Breaking Barriers has so far worked with 23 young people. There are 14,000 pupils who have a learning disability in Scotland today. Will you help us break barriers with them?
Beforehand, he was really lacking in confidence and he wouldn't initiate conversation with people he wasn't very familiar with. But over the last year, it's like he's blossomed.
It's been really good to give him an opportunity to be himself as well.
When friends and family come in the house, he's telling them what he's been doing or asking them what they've been doing. Just really a big change in him. Yeah.
He's smiling at everybody in the audience, not with his head down. It's great, and he's got a good group of friends, and I think this has been a very good experience for him. And we're really pleased and we're really thankful for the opportunity for him to get that, and all the people have worked hard with him.
Like, worst case scenario, you get a qualification after your CV. Best case, you get some nice friends and have a good time. I don't like it, I've earned this, I've done it. I've left things out of here.
So far, Strathclyde has offered so much, and just can't thank them enough for such a great opportunity and experience that I'll carry on throughout my life. Don't give up on your education. Just try your hardest, because an opportunity will come to you. You might not expect it, you might not even know it, you might not even believe it, but it will happen.
Okay, so thank you for watching that. That's a promo video for one of our programs, working in partnership with the business school there. But we do lots of different programs all across the country just like that. So that's an example of the kind of work we do, and our ambitions really is to support people with learning disabilities to have that aspiration and the opportunity to go and get a job. So in terms of what we're going to talk about today, I think it's first off, it's important to talk about the average journey and recognize that there is no average journey for getting a job. And one of the important things to remember as a parent is that young people don't always know what they want to do, and most careers don't follow on from the first job. And so the route to employment and the route to having a job is going to take time, or may take time, and there might be wrong turns taken. but that's okay if the support is there from you at home. So we obviously work with thousands of people every year. Not everyone comes into a program and gets a job. Many people go through a number of programs before they find the right job. Sometimes the right job turns out to be the wrong job, and then they need to come back and get a bit more support to find something else. That all is absolutely fine. So I think it's really important to remember that and recognize that. Lots of people can lose confidence if they don't get a job the first time, or if they start a job that turns out to be wrong for them after a couple of months. It's really important to remember that that happens with all young people. And yes, there's additional support needed, and there's additional pressures for young people with disabilities, but the support is there if you use it. And one of the key things throughout the journey, in my experience, is parents being there to support the young person to have that ambition, to get their bum out of bed in the morning, to talk about issues of work or talk about issues in their support. All those things are incredibly important for the success of the young person. So it's important to recognize that having a job is taking a risk. Trying new things is part of the process. If something doesn't work out, it might not be that employment isn't an option at all. It could just be timing. It could be the provider. It could be the type of support. It could be all manner of things. So things will not go smoothly when you're looking to find a job, and just to recognize that and to be there to support that is critical in the success. And then to talk through the next step is around the principles of good transition. And when I showed this to Tracy, I realized that I had pinched this off the ARC website because I think it's so great. The ARC's principles of ARC 7 principles of good transition are excellent. And in terms of employment, there are some key things in it that we can take out. And so it should be inclusive, in relation to employment, not simulated, not segregated. Employment should be something for which people are paid, for which people do a job like anyone else. We believe that you should start early, 14 upwards, ideally. It avoids the rush to simply go on and choose college, or to choose an option which maybe isn't something you've thought about for a long time. It should be joined up. Sadly, not always the case, and we'll work through some of that this morning, but sadly not always the case. Schools, skills providers, young people having the choice, all this stuff should be joined up for it to be successful. And with support at home, as I've said, the support that parents can give, as with all young people, is critical in achieving that success. Just being there at the end of the day and the start of the day makes a real difference. Now I'm going to talk through the different stakeholders. So you'll all recognize all the different types of stakeholder here, but employment and skills support is kind of commissioned and delivered by all these different stakeholders in your communities, and it can be quite a tricky area to try and understand. Essentially, you've got lots of provision commissioned by different policy areas, all loosely interacting, and that's the intention of the Scottish Government to make that more aligned. But essentially, you've got lots of statutory bodies commissioning and or delivering support. And for a young person with a disability, they might touch more than one of these, maybe even several times on their journey to get a job. And that's okay. But my intention today is to talk you through some of these stakeholders and help you understand what you can expect from them, and what they'll be looking to achieve. So starting off in terms of school, so I don't know, I haven't seen the breakdown of the young people that you're all the parents and carers of, but I'm guessing many of you will have young people in school or just leaving school. And so in terms of the support you could expect in school ahead of transition, it tends to be some focus on the world of work in the latter stages. So stage 5, stage 6, which they call the senior phase. You talk about loose job skills. So what is work? What is money? Having a bank account, turning up, punctual, appearance, those kind of things. Really good stuff. Teachers are good at delivering that learning. And sometimes there's work experience as part of that. Sometimes that's good, sometimes it's not so good. It depends on the school, particularly if young people have more complex needs. They sometimes don't get the work experience that they could get, because there'll be a requirement for that support to be off-site. Sometimes the work experience will be in the school, in the library, in the canteen. We don't always think that's a great piece of work experience because it's not particularly realistic in the environment and the way the young people are treated. But the learning at school is certainly very good. You have careers advisors in schools. They're employed by Skills Development Scotland. Now, they work with hundreds of pupils. There are exceptions, but they don't really have the resource or expertise to support young people with additional support needs. Quite often that they don't do the planning that they might be required in order to have a successful transition for someone with a bit more support needs. That transition planning happens in the last 6 months. Sometimes it's wonderful, sometimes parents are involved, family, support agencies, colleges, support providers. Sometimes it works perfectly, sometimes no one knows it's even happened, not even the young people. So it's very variable in terms of that support, but the learning is very good, but it really will depend on the resources of the school. In terms of what you can kind of expect for work experience, you should be looking at, if there is work experience, you should be looking at who's organised it, where is that being held, was the young person consulted. It's obviously important to have work experience that aligns with the young person's ambitions and motivations. Sometimes that's not always possible. Schools have a limited resource. Sometimes they'll be aligned to local employers they always use. That might not be great for a young person that doesn't want to go and work in a chip shop. They want to go and work in a video game shop. So those kind of things are important in the success here. Is the employer health and safety checked? That will always pretty much be the case with the schools. The local authority will do all the checking, but you'll want to be sure that if the young person has a PIP, like a personal evacuation plan, or if the young person has a specific type of behaviour where there is a specific support requirement, that the employer is aware of that, and the school and health and safety officer have checked that through. You want to make sure that the employer is aware of the young person's support needs, that they're committed to that level of inclusion, and that there's an understanding there. And with school, there will pretty much always be, that will always be the case. Who'll be providing support? Is it off-site? Is it on-site? The kind of support, if something goes wrong, what happens? Does the young person have to go and get the bus home on their own? Will someone come out and pick them up? All those kind of things are things that should be right, and you should ask and check that they've been completed before the work experience starts. In terms of the transition phase, ahead of approaching school, you should look at what is the experience of the careers and the guidance officials who have been working with your son or daughter. Have all options been considered? Quite often young people are prompted to go to college for additional kind of a couple of years worth of steps courses, that kind of thing. Sometimes that's great, sometimes that's what the young person wants to do and it's a really good fit. Sometimes nothing else has been considered, and we've seen that. There are other options which we'll talk through today, so you want to make sure that the young person's been consulted, that all options has been considered, and that some of those stakeholders, like employment providers, like apprenticeship providers, like local authority courses, things like that, have all been considered ahead of making that choice. And your young person in particular has a right to be involved in that and should be involved in that from the start. So in terms of right now, I did this slide in recently. So if you do have a son or daughter who suddenly found themselves in S6 with no idea about what's happening now, I have a great deal of sympathy with you. I think it's an incredibly difficult time. Important thing to remember, that don't panic, there are no wrong choices here. And the most important thing is making a choice that builds on the young person's skills and confidence, and it's something that they can engage with. So there will be other options. Like I say, there will be colleges that are running courses. So you'll have a local college and you can find that out. I've included a link to how you can find that out on the little handout I put through. If you don't know where your local college is, I'm pretty sure you probably will do. There'll be local charities. There'll be volunteering opportunities, or there'll be community programs running. So you can talk to your local authority, or you can talk to your local third sector interface to try and find out what those charities are. if you don't know them already. A Google search is as good as anything here sometimes. And there'll also be training and employment programs running locally via your local authority, via Skills Development Scotland, which is the skills agency, or via the Job Centre as part of Scotland's devolved employment service called Fair Start Scotland. So there will be lots of support options. If it's more learning, you think your young person needs, college or volunteering is maybe a good option. If it's quite intensive job support and feel the young person is ready to work, it's probably the latter. It's probably training or the local authority or Skills Development Scotland programs that'd be the right choice. But there are no wrong choices. As I said, if you make a wrong turn, you can always get back on. In terms of college, so if you have a young person at college, what you can kind of expect, they tend to be 1 or 2 year courses, sometimes called STEPS courses. They're in terms of employability, so they might do lots more work on and build on what they learned at school around confidence for work, ambition for work, and understanding of work. So you have those ones, and then you also have vocational courses, which obviously are more focused on a specific trade. Disabled young people will tend to be go into the employability type courses after school. That tends to be what the majority of young disabled people will go on and do, which is a positive step, and it works for some people. I mean, a decade ago, before all the colleges regionalised, you'd often lead to disabled people staying in college for 10, 20 years. You know, that doesn't happen anymore. But those employability programs are of some value and can be right for the right people. So those are the kind of courses you'd likely to be in. The lecturers are experienced. They are good courses with work experience built in. Again, there tends to be a bit more support to finding work experience that's aligned to the young person's skills and ambitions. You know, I'm talking about things which are a bit more local to where the young person wants, in the sector they want to work, a bit more reflective of their own skills and confidences. They tend to resource that a bit better. Sometimes that'll be in partnership with a provider as well. Sometimes the work is simulated, and that will really be dependent on the young person. So by simulated, I mean working in the college library, working in the college canteen. Sometimes that's a good first step. Sometimes the young person could achieve much more. A simulated work experience is good, but the young people are treated differently. They're treated still like students. You know, they're not, the expectation and onus on them to perform alongside the rest of the team isn't really as high as it would be if they were working in a regular workplace where everyone else is getting paid to be there and to do that work. So sometimes it can let people get away with it's not as much of a real work experience as anything else. So that will really be dependent on the young person themselves. The focus of the course is on demonstrating learning in a work environment, so they'll be assessed against what they learn, and that usually be assessed and accredited through the college. In terms of transition, there's a bit less than school. There is not much onus on colleges to make sure that the young people have a positive destination after they leave college. The onus is on them to get that accreditation. So while some colleges do it really well, it's a bit of a mixed bag. So you would be looking towards the last 6 months of the college course to say, well, actually, what's next? Is it a graduate apprenticeship? Is it moving on to another course in the college? Is it some kind of training course? Is it some kind of employability course? Those would be the next steps from college. But like I say, the college don't tend to take a big hand in that. In terms of things that you could expect as parents from the college and what things you should be looking for, the work experience, again, you want to make sure who's organised it, was the young person consulted, the health and safety, inclusion, you want to make sure those things are covered. Again, with the college, they always will be. It'll be very unusual that they wouldn't be covered. But you'll want to make sure, realistically, you'll be wanting to make sure that the experience is aligned to the young person's ambitions and skills. That's pretty key, because if I want to work in a outdoors job, maybe in a park with a kind of local parks team doing gardening, I probably don't want to be working in an office environment at the printer and using emails all day. Sometimes that does happen. Sometimes that's the only employer that the college have on their list, or the school have on their list, and that's where a young person ends up. There is value in it in terms of broad employability skills, but it can put people off if it's not really what they fancy doing. So it's important to think, to look to make sure that that stuff is being considered. In terms of transition from college, again, you usually want to start doing that about 6 months ahead of transition. Who's giving the support and guidance? Have all the options been considered? Is it not just more college? Because the college will sometimes say, well, you can progress onto this other course to develop your skills there. Sometimes that'll be perfect for the young person. That'll be exactly what they want to do. Sometimes it won't. Sometimes they'll want to go on and maybe have a better experience of work experience or employability skills or an apprenticeship or something like that. So it's just to make sure that everyone's been consulted and that all options have been considered is key. In terms of post-college during COVID, again, there's no wrong choices here. It's important to remember that make a choice that builds on young person's skills and confidence. It's something that they can engage with. You do have options post-college. There'll be lots of, as with schools, there'll be lots of local charities, there'll be lots of volunteering, there'll be lots of options for community support. Those might be limited post-COVID, but things appear to be getting back to normal now. So that will probably go up as the months go on. As well as in terms of training and employment programs, all of those are starting back, and we run some of those, and they're running pretty much as normal, albeit some of the work is remote via the computer. So there'll be lots of opportunities to engage with local community support, local training and employment programs post-college. And there's no, unlike college, there's no point at which you have to apply for that. You can go into those at any point. Other thing to talk about are vocational training and skills. So vocational training and skills as a sector tend to be a year in length. An apprenticeship is an example of that. It tends to be focused on delivering accredited skills certification, delivering core work skills as a sector, as well as sector-specific skills. So there might be doing a piece of work which focuses on communication, presentation, confidence, all those kind of work skills, as well as skills that are very specific to the sector and the type of training that's being delivered. The providers often lack a bit of specialism. They're usually very focused on the vocation itself. So it might be a training provider that just does training in retail or training in plumbing or training in kind of agricultural work. They maybe don't know a lot about working with young people with additional support needs, maybe don't have a lot of experience there, but support can be put in place to make that work. The focus really is on getting the young people some really good work experience and some really good accreditations ahead of moving into work. So in terms of that, if it's vocational training, if it's things like apprenticeships, if it's things like skills development Scotland courses, you're looking at what experience does the provider have? Is the training accessible in a way that is taught and marked? Apprenticeships and skills and accredited courses don't need to be exams. They don't need to have a written element. There is a level of flexibility that they are allowed to have around the way that they assess. Learning through observation, learning through interactions, and talking about what's been learned and things like that. So is the training accessible in the way it's taught and marked? What support's available for learning? Sometimes when you talk about support for learning to a training provider, they just automatically assume it's going to be a scribe and someone to help them, write down what they learnt and put their thoughts onto paper. And that's not always the case. It could be a job coach, someone to work alongside them on the job or in the training. It could be all manner of support, and also all kinds of support is available. There are each of those programs has funding to align and to get more support for the training experience. who are the training organisations? Equality partners, a lot of apprenticeship providers, a lot of skills programs are delivered by equality organisations. A lot of big MA providers also work with charities like Enable or other organisations to help, find people with disabilities that might go into those courses or support people with disabilities that are on those courses. In terms of the work-based learning, again, you just wanted to make sure that the employers have the health and safety in place, they're aware, and there's a level of inclusivity in terms of the work they're doing, and that the provider themselves has made sure that that's happened. Who will be providing support? Again, support in these things isn't always on the job and all the time, so sometimes it'll be sporadic. If it's the case that you need more on-the-job support or more individual support for a longer period of time, that can be negotiated, and there are ways of providing that through some of the support resources that these training providers have. So that's something that you want to be looking at. And also, what are the prospects of employment for an apprenticeship, for an example, that can lead to a job, but it also can not lead to a job. So you want to be looking at that before you start, because it would be, sometimes people are very upset after doing an apprenticeship and it doesn't lead to a job. So those are things that either before it ends, if you put the transition support in place, then there's a bit more resilience when that does end, or it lets you start looking for other opportunities that you can take advantage of when it does end. In terms of I can just say, in terms of apprenticeships and training, I just wanted to add in as well, there are new types of modern apprenticeship coming out. So there's a foundation apprenticeship, which is something that young people can start in school, or which look excellent and which have a kind of a learning and work component in the senior phase of school ahead of them leaving school into a longer apprenticeship. So those are kind of more and more of those in Scotland now. And there's also a graduate apprenticeship for people who are it's almost like a prep ahead of them going into a more senior phase of education. But the apprenticeships, you can check all that out. I put a link in the document that Tracy's disseminated there, apprenticeships.scot, I think it is, to find out different type of apprenticeships you can access. National and local employment programs, well, these are what it says on the tin. They're employment programs. They're focused on getting jobs and meeting KPIs around quality and long-term retention. They tend to be funded directly by a government agency, so like the DWP, like Glasgow City Council, City of Edinburgh Council, those kind of things. They can be delivered directly by the authority. Glasgow City Council have got a team in Jobs and Business Glasgow that do a lot of work, or they can be contracted out to an employment organisation. So Enable are contracted out by City of Edinburgh Council and Dundee to do work in the local authority on their behalf, specifically with people with additional support needs. So it can be lots of different providers working in different local authorities, and they deliver broad employment support. So, and it's for school leavers, so you tend not to be able to be at school and be able to access that support. It's designed to get people into work. As I said, it's focused on meeting job targets, so the intervention tends to be shorter, with more weekly engagement. So it can be quite intensive, some of the programs, and there are some really good examples of them working well. In terms of what you should be looking for, who's delivering it and why. You should be looking at organisations that have an understanding of disability, have a commitment to inclusion, have an understanding of your son or daughter, or to make sure that they've done the work to understand your son or daughter's uniqueness and their skills and confidence as part of their planning and entry into that programme. All programmes, as a badge of quality, will come out and meet the young person first and say, well, let me tell you about what this program's like and what we would expect from you and what you can expect from us. I would absolutely expect that to always happen. So if that doesn't happen and there's no awareness of the young person's disability there, that would be a warning sign, but very rarely the case, I would imagine. And what's their experience? You can ask them, how many young people with a disability are you working with? What are your staff experience? Are they trained? How are they managed? All these things will be important in the type of support that the young person gets. In terms of the program, well, how long is the program? Is it a 13-week or 26-week course? Is it a year? What are the outcomes? Do you want the young person to get a job? Do they want to progress, meet some kind of milestone? If they get a job, what happens after that? Are you obliged to provide support for 13 weeks, 26 weeks, 52 weeks? All these programs are different and difficult to understand sometimes. So you can have that stuff from the provider, and you can get a better understanding of what's being delivered, and you can almost have a bit of a quality check in there sometimes. And all providers would be delighted to help you with it. I know that we would, because like I say, having the parental support at home really does make a difference in the success for the young person. In terms of the other programs, well, you can ask, how successful is it? You know, how well integrated is this locally? Are they working on their own and not working with different community services? Sometimes an employment provider might be required to go and work with another community provider to get some support for literacy, or to access some new clothes, or to get support so the young person can get a free bus pass, all those kind of things. So the integration locally can be critical to success, and you can ask all that kind of stuff. What happens if it's not successful? As I say, there are not many employment programs in the world where everyone who starts gets a job. And so what happens if not? Are they left with no kind of triage into something else? Is it up to them to do that, or is there some kind of signposting onto another service? How does that work? If a job is achieved, again, what happens to the support? And a lot of these programs will deliver support for a period. It will tend to be 13 to 26 weeks. In some cases, it's up to a year, which is ideal. It will very rarely be longer than a year, simply because providers don't have the capacity to continue delivering that. But good providers, in particular charities, will always stay in touch. And if a young person drops out the job, or encounters an issue, or even gets promoted, going back to the provider, particularly if it's a third sector organisation, a disability provider, they'll always want to help and continue making that person's journey a success. In terms of voluntary sector programs, then, what do I mean by that? I don't mean programs which are commissioned by statutory bodies. So I mean things that are funded by a grant giver, like a charitable trust, like the National Lottery, the Comic Relief, Children in Need, those kind of things. Now, those will tend to be delivered by specialist providers, so specific to young people with learning disabilities and autism, or specific to a local area, Falkirk or the Highlands, or an area like that. So a specialist, and they tend to be focused on employment with more holistic support. It will tend to have greater access to local assets, better integration into the local community, a better understanding of the young person's support needs, and it's quite often delivered over a longer time scale. It tends to be less mechanistic in terms of the support, rather than the national kind of statutory programs, which are often over a short period, very intensive, which are quite often very good actually in terms of success. These tend to be delivered over a longer time scale, and will tend to be for people who just explore, know they want a job, but don't know what kind of support they need. So it can be a really good option, and we deliver lots of these as well. In terms of things, these look very similar in terms of things that you can be expecting to find out who's delivering it and why. Are Enable Scotland delivering this program? Why? Well, we've got a particular vision around learning disability. We're delivering as well to help people, those kind of things. What's their experience? How inclusive is it? How inclusive is the planning? How inclusive is the interaction and the support that will happen over the period of this program? Again, how are the staff assigned? How are they qualified? What's their training been? What's their management like? All those things will make a difference on the type of support, and the provider will be happy to tell you that kind of stuff. Again, how long is the program? What are the outcomes? What are the things that you can expect to see, the products that you can expect to see, you or the young person can expect to see coming home with them in terms of their own evaluations? There might be a little bit of written work, there might be some feedback, all these kind of things. Are they involved in the feedback, in the planning? How well integrated locally is it? And again, what happens if it's not successful? If you don't get the job on an Enable Scotland programme, which happens to hundreds of young people we engage with every year, we make sure that they're signposted onto something else. It might be another thing with Enable, it might be a thing with another provider, it might be that they've decided that employment's really not for them, and we help them to do some volunteering, or help them to engage with a community program. Those are the things you should be looking for to make sure that the provider is right for your son or daughter. And if a job is achieved, what happens to the support? Again, with these kind of programs, there tends not to be a lot of support built in for a longer period. As I say, it can be quite resource intensive, but you should be looking to see what happens after the job is achieved. And a brief note on supported employment. I'm an advocate for supported employment. It is a particular methodology. It's internationally recognized as the most effective method of supporting someone with complex and moderate needs into work. It is train and train and place traditional methodologies for supporting people into work. So train and place means you train a person in employability skills, you support them for a period to do kind of CV building and employment workshops and confidence and presentation, and you put them into a workplace, and then they sink or swim. Supported employment is place and train. So you find someone the job based on their own skills, based on their own abilities, and you find an employer that's right for that person, and then you train them whilst they're in the workplace to understand that piece of work, that job. So it's a switch of resource, really. So whilst a train and place provider focuses all its resource on getting the young person ready, getting them in a job, and then kind of leaving them to it, a supported employment provision is getting the person the job, which is doable. It is possible to get a person with complex needs a job quite quickly if it's the right fit and they have the right skills, and then focusing your resource on making them keep that job. That is the essence of supported employment. It's a much more successful methodology for keeping people in work. Usually delivered by a voluntary sector organisation. As I say, I'm the chair of SUS, so I kind of would be saying this. But you know, so SUS has a list of providers that are members that do this work. You know, Jamie, you're looking. Yes.
Jamie, sorry, can I just ask, what is SUS? What does SUS stand for?
Yeah, SUS is the Scottish Union of Supported Employment. So it's like I said at the start, it's a membership organisation for organisations that practice supported employment. And so there is a qualitative assessment that goes on in terms of that work. And there are other organisations across the UK. So there's BASE, which is the British Association of Supported Employment, and there's NIUS, which is the Northern Ireland Union of Supported Employment. Now, I know you're all in Scotland, but at the time I was putting this together, I didn't know whether or not this was a UK-wide thing or not. So in case you move to Belfast or London in the next couple of weeks, you might want to keep a note of those acronyms. But SUS, if you're in Scotland, is the Scottish Union of Supported Employment. And like I say, it's usually delivered by a voluntary sector organisation. It's intensive support between the job coach and the individual. So you can see Mackie there is supporting that young man in a Pizza Hut. And actually, pizza chefing is one of the best methodologies for supported employment because it's very systematic. You can break down each step and help someone understand the intricacies of each role, and then basically learn that job. And so supported employment is helping someone learn tasks through task analysis and systematic support. You can find more about that on the Scottish Union of Supported Employment website. I put the link in the handout as well. It's not delivered in enough places, sadly, and part of the vision of SUS is to improve its prevalence in Scotland, but it is delivered in a number of areas. So that is a very good option for people with more complex or higher support needs. In terms of supported business and social enterprises, they're often confused with supported employment. They're not supported employment. They're okay for some, not everyone. So they're typically people with more complex needs, and typically older people working in supported businesses. So a supported business is a job within a supported work setting. It's traditionally manufacturing, it's traditionally a cafe or horticulture, working alongside other disabled people with support workers to support them to do that work. It's brilliant for some people if that's what they want to do. It's not okay for some in terms of its inclusivity. Jobs are sometimes unpaid, sometimes they're paid less than usual, sometimes the person uses their own self-directed support to contribute to being in that workplace. They can be a fantastic piece of it can be a fantastic life opportunity for many people, so it's not to do them down, but just to be aware that a supported business is a bit different from supported employment in that it is a workplace pretty much entirely made up of disabled people who are working with support. It's usually a charity, it's usually reliant on some funding as well as a bit of commercial activity as well. And social enterprises do a bit of kind of supported business activity as well. So lots of social enterprises across Scotland take on disabled people as part of their training income. They'll do that work, and lots of disabled people volunteer in social enterprises and charity shops all across Scotland. Again, if that's what the person wants to do, it's okay. There is a big, sadly, there are lots of people with learning disabilities across Scotland who volunteer and consider that a job. That could be in a local charity shop, but I've met people who've been volunteering for years in the shops where their colleagues around them are all being paid, which is not great. It's a person's individual choice to make that decision, but we should be aiming for higher in Scotland, I think. But it is all very much dependent on what the person wants to do and where they feel their ability is best suited. In terms of supported employment, then, you want to be looking at who's delivering it and why, what's their experience. These are very similar kind of questions. You know, how are their staff assigned, how are they trained, how are they managed? Is the staff member new? Are they very experienced? Have they worked with someone like your son or daughter before? How long will the program go on? What's the working environment like for your son or daughter? How is it funded? You know, is it a program which is a statutory funded program, so it will be quite intensive? Some supported employment programs are part of statutory funding. Is it funded by a voluntary sector kind of grant giving? Is it a lottery program that's going to last a bit longer than usual? These are all kind of interesting things that you can be asking. And again, it's a support for transition. What happens if they get a job? What happens if they don't get a job? These are things that you need to be asking before you start the program. And so in summary, really, I want to leave you with some key messages around talking to people. Don't be afraid to ask. I can probably count on my fingers how many times a parent's got in touch with me personally, as I've worked for Enable for so long that I've delivered and managed some of these services. But not many times will a parent ask, or a young person go into much detail around, actually, how does this work, and what can I expect here? We make it our business to let people know what they can expect and to be very inclusive in the way we design programs and deliver programs. But really, in the ideal world, you want much more interaction from home. Make sure the programs are inclusive. Make sure there's an understanding of your son or daughter's support needs with the provider. That's something that's going to be critical. Check how experienced the provider and their team is. They'll be very happy to tell you. It's important to have support at home where things aren't going well, and they are going well, because, like with all young people going into work, things will change once they get the job. Things will change if they don't get their job. So it's important to be that person that's there to support them at home, because you're doing things there that the provider really can't do. And don't be discouraged if things don't work out first time. Like I say, that most young people, your first job isn't the job you have for life, and you go into a support for employment program, and if you don't get a job, don't give up. Keep trying, keep looking for organisations that can help you, because there will always be those programs there. So that's it really. That's maybe a bit of a whistle-stop tour, but I'm very happy for anyone to come to me and talk to me about it. I have an email which I think is on the stuff that Tracy will send out. You can get me through Enable Scotland's Twitter, Enable Scotland's Facebook. You can contact me in many different types of manner. And me and my team are really happy to talk to you about these kind of things, because it is very personal and it is very unique in terms of the individual. So please ask. and there we have it. That's the end of my whistle stop tour through Scotland's employment services.
Okay, let's just come back to me then, that's fine. Jamie, that's really good, thank you. And I think the one thing that kind of underlines for me, as I'm sure it probably does for everybody else, is just how big this area is and how complex it is. So I think I would say that, you know, there's such a lot of information there. Good thing just to remind you that this is being recorded. We have got the link. You can listen to it later. You can go back and, you know, sort of pick out the bits that are relevant to you there, because some things will apply to some people, some things will probably apply more to others, and it's not necessarily going to be relevant. You know, everything is not going to be relevant to everybody at the same stage. I think the things that I would take from that, particularly Jamie, is as parents, you know, the first thing is to start with your young person's individual interests. So, you know, kind of almost like put skills to one side, because skills can be developed over time and a little bit later on, but start with what they want to do. I was kind of struck when you were talking about, you know, there's no point in a young person whose interest is in the outdoors having work experience in a chip shop, because that's not necessarily something that's going to motivate them, it's not going to engage them, and it's not going to really give them, you know, a route into something that they might want to do longer term. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, it stands to reason, really, doesn't it? I mean, so usually that's at school or in college, and most people will have done work experience when they're at school, and quite often that is just a bit of work experience. And you know, it might be that they work at their mum or dad's firm, or a local, you know, somewhere the school's worked out for them. But for a young person with an additional support need, it can be quite demotivating if it's totally, you know, if it's somewhere just local or somewhere on a list that they've got. So work experience is very easy to negotiate and find, but schools and colleges don't always have the resource to be able to do that. And particularly
because one of the questions that we've had coming in is, this is from Diane, and it says, the school told us they couldn't arrange work experience for my son at the same time as the rest of his class, and now, because of COVID, it doesn't look like it's going to happen at all. What should our next steps be? So what as parents can you do if the work experience that is being offered is out of step with what your young person would really like to do?
Well, it shouldn't be. I mean, I don't know the ins and outs of that individual school, but quite often schools, like I say, schools don't often have a lot of resource to go and find work experience specifically catered towards young people with additional support needs. And there's a recognition there that quite often young people with additional support needs are going to schools which aren't in their local area. So they might be going to a school which is, you know, they could live in Cumbernauld and they're going to a school in Bells Hill, you know, so them going into work in an office in Bells Hill might be no use to them because they can't get there every day, that kind of thing. So what can parents do is they can like talk to the school and see what they can negotiate. They can talk to an organisation or a charity that might be able to provide a bit of work experience or source a bit of work experience. And work experience can be sourced by parents. Like I say, most people have experience of work experience. Most people will have done work experience at school. That can be negotiated, and the council will go and do the health and safety checking and do all that work. So absolutely go in and try and negotiate it. And if you feel as a parent you have to go out and, you know, if your son or daughter really wants to work in a video game shop or a cake, but you know, making fancy cakes and all these kind of things, you can source it yourself and ask to partner with the school in doing all the checks and making sure it will work well.
Okay, and if somebody has actually left school, I mean, I guess as parents, it's perfectly okay to approach local organisations and try and set something up yourself if somebody's willing to do that, as long as you kind of, all the checks you were talking about health and safety, you know, what the experience of people are, make sure that they know what the young person's needs are around support and so on. You can do that. I think one of the challenges, there's another comment and slight question that's come through, is as a carer for a young person with learning disabilities who wants to be a waitress, it feels like after college the ownership was on us to look for employment. We approached some local cafes where we live, and one of them was happy to take her on once a week as a volunteer. So she's been volunteering for 6 months and was about to start paid employment. Along came COVID. The restaurant now is not reopening, unfortunately, and that parent, you know, obviously feels they've got to start all over again, and they're not quite sure who to turn to for help with that. Are there any? Is there anything that you would advise them to do?
Absolutely, yeah. So in terms of, I'm not an expert on hospitality and catering, but you just have to watch the news to see that there's going to be a very big impact on that across the world. But that's not to say those ambitions should be quashed, that you can absolutely go and look at things like the Employability Fund, which is run by Skills Development Scotland. So you can go to the website I've included on the handout and find out and talk to them about who the local providers are. That stuff is all being delivered at the moment. It might be a bit remote, like I say, we're delivering it and it's over Zoom and things like that. But there's a bit of, it's workplace learning, it's accreditations. So that's all helpful in terms of developing your daughter's CV and likelihood of getting another job. You could continue to look at volunteering, although it does look, work experience looks like it might be hard to negotiate for the time being, I think. So you could also look at things like apprenticeships. You could also look at things like Fair Start Scotland, employment courses, which might boost her employability skills and accreditations ahead of going into a job once all this stuff is over.
That's great, thank you. And presumably, as you said, Skills Development Scotland, job centres, organisations like Enable obviously will have information and be able to give you pointers for things like that, yes? They'll be able to give you information.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and if you look on the list there, you can just call them up and ask and say, look, this is my daughter and this is her specific, these are the details around her support and where she is. And most of them have, I would say, check out all your options. It might be there's a really good course at college starting, or REHIS is a really important qualification for people in the catering industry to have. It's about REHIS, so it's about handling food, it's about food hygiene. Right. So that could be something your daughter could work towards getting, and absolutely Enable deliver REHIS. I mean, it's certainly achievable for people with learning disabilities, and so that could boost her career chances beyond just waitressing.
Mm-hmm. We have something from Heather, and Heather says, I've been looking for employment learning opportunities for my son who's just left school. Ideally a workshop type environment where he learns what is expected in the workplace, interview training, etc. I haven't managed to find anything. We live in Newton Mearns. So I don't know, Heather, I'm not sure if you will have approached Sue's, which Jamie mentioned. If there's anything there, you might already have tried that route, but if not, they might be worth approaching. But Jamie, is there anything that you know of in that area that might be worth looking into?
Yeah, so in East Wren, you do have, like I say, you have the Fair Start Scotland working in East Renfrewshire, Enable do deliver Fair Start Scotland in East Renfrewshire in partnership with the WISE Group, so you can access that through the Job Centre. East Wren also run their own employment support team, which can be accessed through the local authority. Also, East Wren have, unlike a lot of local organisations, they still have a LAC team, which is a local area coordinator. So you can sometimes engage with the local area coordinator there and see, they can help you integrate into the kind of support that's available locally.
That's great, thank you. There's another question here from Jane, and Jane says, my son has complex learning disabilities. He's cognitively functioning at a pre-literacy level, and he enjoys task-focused activities and gets lots of satisfaction from achieving tasks and helping. How realistic is supported employment for someone of his level of disability and support need? I think that's a question that you often hear, because people can't actually picture necessarily their young people in employment.
Yeah, absolutely. And employment is very personal, and it isn't for everyone, but that's not to say that people with very complex needs can't work. And if you look at the videos that were developed around when supported employment was born as a practice by a guy called Mark Gold, they're for people with very complex learning disabilities. And you can look at the videos, they're called Try Another Way. They're on YouTube. It's about systematic instruction, and it's all about learning complex tasks through breaking tasks up into individual parts. And so, yes, it's absolutely achievable. You would have to work with a really good provider to be able to deliver that, and you'd have to find a job that was welcoming of that kind of, that kind of support in their business. But it's absolutely achievable in the long term. So. don't be put off.
That's good. Right, we've got a general one here, which I think is going to be important for just about everybody. And it's from Sam, and she's asking, what rights would my daughter have as a disabled person in the workplace?
Well, really the same as everyone else in terms of their rights to fair pay and the rights to hours and the right to be consulted and all these kind of things within the workplace. There are additional rights around the Equality Act if a person is applying for work and how they're considered and how they're interviewed. And there are also some additional things there around disclosure of disabilities. So if your daughter has a particular complex need, you would want them to be, she would want her to be disclosing that to the employers to make sure that they're providing the right support, you know, and make sure that they're aware of it so that they can provide that support. There is support available for employers, things like access to work, funds employers to put job coaching or modifications in place to their policy and protocol. Access to work is a DWP fund, still available, widely underspent. Tends to be that people think about physical disability when they think about access to work, think about lower desks and ramps. But for people with additional support needs like a learning disability or autism, job coaches are available, support to go in and train the workplace and all these kind of things. So there is support out there, but she has the same rights as anyone else, but she has, you know, she's supposed to be giving an interview if she meets the requirements of the job, job criteria.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think under the Equality Act, employers are under an obligation to not put a disabled employee at a significant disadvantage compared to their non-disabled employees. But for that, they do actually need to know that you have a disability and what that actually involves. And I know there's a lot of discussion, as with going to college, around whether you actually want to tell people about your disability or actually, you know, say, I have this. Yeah, this is my condition. A lot of young people, I think particularly on the autism spectrum, I'm aware of a lot of young people who really don't want that to be communicated. And you can understand that, that's understandable up to a point, but then it is also, that does mean it makes it harder to actually ask for the reasonable adjustments that the employer or the college or the university, you know, really should be making. So that's a conversation perhaps to have with your young person, if that's an issue or might be an issue for them, just so that they're aware of the pros and cons of actually, you know, sort of telling people what their disability is, or sharing that information. Yeah,
I think so. And I think you're right, Trey. Identity politics is really something that young people think about a lot. You know, not just the gender and things we talk about you hear on the news, but the concept of disability, the concept of being disabled, are things that young people sometimes don't like to talk about and don't identify with it. But unfortunately, employers still work in that very clunky way, and they do need to know if the support's going to be put in place, and they won't disclose it to anyone if it's managed well.
Yeah, and I think the other thing to say is that if you're going for a job and you have a disability, you can actually ask for support, as I understand it, around the interview as well. If you receive an interview and you need something like an accessible room, or you need you know, it's a little bit more time to process questions or whatever, you can actually request that at the interview stage as well as part of the job. And an employer is under a legal obligation to be able to provide that for you if they've offered you an interview, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And so sometimes that means a person coming into the interview, sometimes that means a bit of advanced preparation, sometimes it means, you know, rearrangement of the interview type and structure. But yeah, we do loads of that kind of stuff. So absolutely, and most employers will be very happy to make those modifications.
Yeah, and I think, you know, another thing as parents is, you know, so recognizing that, as with so many things, parents are very often their young person's advocate around these areas as well. So you know, if you've got a really good program, Jamie's gone through the questions to ask the checks, you know, to satisfy yourself that it's going to meet their needs, absolutely, but it's perfectly okay, you know, to actually continue to make sure that those support needs are met, that they're communicated properly, that people understand you know, what your young person needs to be able to make something a success for them. And I think, you know, sometimes we can feel a little bit, it's a little bit kind of backwards in coming forwards, or a little bit awkward about approaching people and communicating that. But I think if nobody else is in a position to do it, then parents and families are the ones who keep on advocating for that and supporting their young people in that way. I think that's just kind of one of the facts that we have to be prepared for up to an extent.
I couldn't get that message across strongly enough. As in my experience, the support at home is absolutely critical to the success. More so for young people with disabilities, because an employment organisation can do what they can, but they're not with the young person all the time, and the young person sometimes won't disclose, I'm worried about this, or I didn't like this guy at work, or I don't know how to get there, and all that kind of stuff. So it's mum and dad having that, being there, to help at home is a huge factor in success.
I think we've got time for one more question. So this is from Helen. And Helen says, one of the issues we've had is that my daughter was 16 when she was diagnosed with a neurodegenerative condition that causes physical and cognitive issues. She still has some abilities, but these are deteriorating. So how realistic is it for her to obtain employment when skills that she learns are likely to be forgotten within a year or two?
Well, it's still realistic to attain work now, and if the thing about disability, I guess, is that the support can change over time, and so if your daughter goes into work and that support needs to change, then a flexible employer and a good employer will make the changes necessary. Maybe that will involve working with an agency, maybe that be support through access to work, maybe that will involve talking to your daughter about things that make the job more accessible to her. But for many jobs, I couldn't see that being too much of an issue. If people acquire long-term health conditions and disabilities in their working lives all the time, and a good employer will make sure that they continue to be able to do that work. So it's certainly not impossible, and it's about finding the right agency and the right employer, but certainly it's not impossible.
That's lovely, thank you. Right, I think we could probably, there are aspects of this, obviously, that we could carry on talking about for a lot longer, sort of paid versus unpaid work, volunteering. We haven't even touched on self-employment, which for some young people, is actually an option. So I suspect that probably we'll need to return to this at a future webinar as well. We're already starting to think about the next series of webinars that we might do and topics that we could cover. So I have a feeling that we might be revisiting this. But in the meantime, I'm going to draw this to a close for today. Obviously, any more information, Jamie said he's happy for me to share his email address with you. You can get in touch with him, you can get in touch with me. Any questions that you have, we'll try and answer them as best we can. Especially at the moment, we all know that we're in uncertain times. Nobody can quite predict what's going to happen. But because something isn't seeming to be happening now, doesn't mean that it's never going to happen. We will get through this and things will change over time. So, it might just be a matter of actually keeping your young person's skills developing, their interests, finding out more about what they want to do, thinking a bit more about what they might be interested in doing, so that when the time comes, you're actually ready to identify the right program or the right support or the right networks for them. Enable is obviously a fantastic place to start for information. There's also another website that I've mentioned in this series before, which is the Talking About Tomorrow website that's managed by Contact, and that's got a lot of information for parents in Scotland about how to explore some of these things. And there's information on there about what that you could pass on to employers or prospective employers. Jamie touched on this again. If they don't know what help they can get in employing disabled people, or they're a little bit scared about it because they've never done it, but they would like to give it a try. There are all sorts of schemes and funds and support out there for them, and they probably won't know about that. So if you can get information about that and find out about it and communicate that to them, that could be the difference in opening up an opportunity for somebody that might not otherwise be available to them. So it's worth having a look at Talking About Tomorrow. You can Google it, it'll come up more or less at the top of the search. Click on Getting a Job, and there's information in there that's useful for employers as well as for parents and for young people. So there's a couple of weeks break now in this series before we have the last webinar. That's not happening now until the 19th of August. And for the last one, that is going to be with Contact, and it's going to be the head of their family finance team, who's going to be looking at benefits and finance, and in particular the benefit choices that families face when they have young people who are aged 16 to 19. Because that's quite individual to families, and it's really important to know what you're entitled to, especially I think in this kind of period that we're in, where it can be difficult to agree budgets and it can be difficult to agree funding around support. Knowing what you're entitled to and getting that in place is really, really important. And they're also going to be talking about the changes to disability living allowance, because there are new rules coming into place for Scotland about the movement from disability living allowance to personal independence payment. So if that's something that might well affect you, then that's a good webinar to sign up. So that will be the 19th of August at 10:30 in the morning again. So until then, I'm just going to say thank you, Jamie, for all of that information. That was fantastic, and thank you for your time today. I'll pass that out to parents. I'm sure that there will be more questions coming through to you. I hope you can cope with that, but I'm sure you will be able to.
No, I mean, one of the interesting things is that I usually do this presentation to groups of parents, and it's usually very informal, and we end up talking about individual issues. So it's a bit weird doing it as a webinar. So thank you for bearing with me. But like I say, I'm happy to help, and we're here to support. So if there are particular questions, do get in touch.
Thank you. Yeah, it's weird times for all of us. We're all getting used to the new way of doing things. So to everybody else, thank you very much for coming along. Enjoy the rest of your day, and I hope to see you again on the 19th of August. Okay, bye.